So I'm going to show today how to hook up some leads to this so that you can run possibly. I'm going to try running a electric bike with two of these. So first thing we need to do is pop the cover off. You have to take out the 4 screws here. Those are using the Torx bit, the security Torx bit, or like I show in a previous video, you can just use a flat blade if you can jam a flat blade in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 2 wires, run it through the case. I'll run it through the case first, and then I'm going to solder directly to these tabs, and I'm just going to connect an XT60 connector to that, and then I'll have the two XT60 connectors going to a kind of like a Y splice that is going to go to an XT90 connector that'll match the one that I've got on my bike. So the first thing you want to do is you need some wire. I don't have the right kind of wire, but I do have this extension cord wire. It's 14 gauge wire. Should be alright for this test. I think it might be a little bit undersized, but when I look at my other bike batteries, they don't look like they're much thicker than 14, if they're even 14. So I think this should be okay, especially for a short run. So I've got about a foot of cable here, and this is just bought from Home Depot or Rona or something like that. And it's 14 gauge 2 wire, and I always buy, if I'm buying this wire, I buy it for making extension cords. And so that you can use the extension cord in the winter, I always make sure it's like a rubber, something that's good for low temperatures, that it'll still be flexible. And this seems to work really well. Okay, so let's get started. So first thing I want to do is cut it in half. So I'm just going to fold it in half like that and cut it. And you want to make sure you cut it in half before you solder the wires on, otherwise you're going to be shorting everything together. I've already stripped off about, I don't know, 2.5, 3 inches on the end there. I'm going to feed that through. And I'm going to have the black lead, the black wire, tied to the positive, which is this side, and the negative, which will be the white on that side. So I'll just put a bit of flux on there. And then to solder, I've got a soldering gun here. The soldering gun is it's a 2-position, and it's 100 watt or 140 watts, so it'll give me lots of power so that I can easily solder to this. Now you want to be careful because this battery's fully charged. So you got to be careful not to short anything. So there I've got the 2 wires soldered on. Now it's just a matter of getting the case back on. So you need to spread the wires so that it can get on the other side of these 2 posts, or whatever you want to call them. So that's why you need enough lead there to be able to get the case back on. And then this side I always leave the label on. So that'll hold that. So that's one battery done. Well, I still have to put the XT60 on there. And whenever you're doing these connectors, you want to use this one for your battery, because if you use this one for your battery, something could easily get in there and short that out. A key or a screw or something. So always make sure you put put it on this way. And they are marked, if you want to be just consistent, they are marked. The flat side is the positive, the side that has that taper is the negative. It is marked, but just for consistency, you want to make sure you follow that. So I could take this connector that I made up with the XT90 on it and just solder the wires directly to here, so I'd have 2 wires going to each one of these to make my Y connector. But I'm not sure if 2 batteries is going to be enough, so I'm going to put on some XT60 connectors so that I can plug in 2 batteries, and then if I need to, it's easier to add more. Plus, it also gives me the flexibility of using these batteries for other projects. So if I have a bunch of these charged up, I can use them for different things. So I'm going to put an XT60 on the end here, and then I can build connectors to connect them to other devices. So what we're going to do next is we're going to strip off some wire here, the outer insulation. What I plan on doing actually later too is I'd like to put in a fuse in here, so that what I'll do is I'll cut this and I'll put in a fuse, like maybe one of these mini automotive fuses. But right now I don't have any holders for them, so I'm not sure which size I need, so you can buy little holders that'll hold these little fuses. Or what I've done in the past is I've actually just soldered these in line, just soldered it in line and then put heat shrink on everything, and that'll work. But I think what I might do is, for now, I might cut this wire so that I don't accidentally short this end out, because once I have these stripped, chances of them shorting is a lot greater. So what I might do is I might just cut this one line so that I can put a fuse in later, but for now it's not going to be shorting out on this end when I'm trying to solder on this connector. So I have these, what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to cut the wire, and then I can use this to splice the wire back together until I get the fuse holders. So you just open this up, put the wire in, and close it up, and these are supposed to be rated for 32 amps. I should not be drawing 32 amps from each battery. If I am, that's way too much for these batteries anyways. So for now, that's what I'm going to use, just to put in line here so that the wires aren't touching. So I can cut this wire, I'll splice it back together with this, and that way when I'm soldering this end to this connector, there's zero risk of, if the wires do short, it's not going to short out. So I'll start by cutting this wire. These are supposed to be stripped. So now nothing can short out. I can work on this end safely without worries about these wires touching and shorting out and burning things down. So as you can see, I have a problem with heat transferring, shrinking the heat shrink up here rather than down here where I need it. But that's okay. I always did plan on using this. This is a self-fusing rubber tape, and it's not sticky. It has a protective, like, to keep it from sticking to itself in the wrap. It comes in a roll like this. This is 1 inch wide roll. I don't find 1 inch works well. I find it's better if you cut it in half. And the way you use it is you stretch it and wrap it, and it's kind of starts to bond to itself. And I find this works better than heat shrink in a lot of instances. The trick is to get it to stretch this tiny area. Stretch. And the beauty of this stuff is that once you get it on, you pretty much have to cut it off just like the heat shrink. It bonds to itself pretty good. And at the end you want to stretch it and tear it. That'll make it thinner at the edge so it's less likely to lift off. Or if you can't, what I sometimes do is use heat. You always want to stretch it. That's what causes it to stick to itself. So you stretch it as you apply it. This one's long enough, I should be able to tear it as I'm pulling on it, and then it seems to create a tapered edge or a thinner edge so that it adheres to itself better. So we'll stretch it. And that's not coming off. I'm just going to use the lighter to heat shrink the heat shrink bit more. Wouldn't hurt to heat these up a bit too. See, this is the one that I couldn't stretch. Okay, so that's both batteries done. So I've got the XT60 connector on the one side. Now I just need to take the XT90 with the two ends here, and I'm going to put on two XT60 connectors on here somehow. May have to put on some smaller wires because this gauge of wire is way too thick. This is, I think it's 8 gauge, if I remember correctly. It's 8 gauge silicone wire, so it should be nice and flexible, but it's the 8 gauge won't fit into the XT60s. It just barely fits into the XT90. So I may have to use some other wire to attach to the XT60s. So let's do that. This is how I like to join wires so that I get a good connection. I kind of create a fan with a stiffer wire and then feed it through, trying to intermix the wires a bit. And then twist it up. Now this wire is a 14 gauge wire, and this thicker wire is an 8 gauge wire. So I've kind of just taken the wire and split it in half, creating two separate connection points. And actually, even a half, it seems to be more than the thickness of this 14 gauge wire. So yeah. So I'll finish this up and show you the finished product. So here it is, it's cooled off a bit, so you can see kind of how good or bad I've soldered this. I've heated it up enough so that the solder has flowed into the strands of the wire to bond them together. It seems pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is just I have some heat shrink slid down the wire so that I can heat shrink it, but I also want to cover it up with some of this. This is that self-fusing tape that I told you about. This will just give a little bit more protection, just in case there's some pokey bits on this wire that want to poke through the heat shrink. This will, and yeah, I can keep these together. It's the same connection. So yeah, that's just gonna help to insulate the wire a little bit better from the other wire. Now I didn't pull it and stretch it and let it rip off because I'm going to be covering it with heat shrink anyway, so the heat shrink will help keep it from unraveling if the end there doesn't stick very well. Like this end here, it's not attached to the actual rubber, so it's probably not going to stick there, but once I slide the heat shrink up there and shrink that'll hold it all together. And then the next step is to try this out on the bike, see how the two batteries work. Actually, there's one step that I'm going to show you guys. When I connect the batteries, you want to make sure that your batteries are as close to the same voltage as possible, because if one battery is, say, at 30 volts and the other one's at 40 volts, you're going to have a huge rush of current that could melt wires and blow up circuit boards and stuff. So you want them to be as close as possible to the same voltage. And so I'm going to check them before I connect them together. Once they're connected together, we can charge them together and discharge them together, and they should work pretty good, I guess, as long as one battery isn't ridiculously underpowered compared to the other. So there we go. So now I can plug the two batteries into here, and then we'll have the XT90 to plug into the motor or the controller of my bike. So here's the two Ryobi batteries with the Y connector to connect them together. Both batteries are fully charged. I'm going to throw them in the bag here. And this is just a temporary thing. I'm thinking of making a mount for that. And then I'll, just so the wires won't get caught in the... So this is the connector that usually powers it from this battery here, which of course isn't there. So normally that's plugged in, so now we're plugged into the Ryobi batteries. Okay, I'm going to take it for a ride.